was inspired by conversations we had in our recent Talks About God class, inspired by September 11, 2001, and a dear friend of mine's experience that day. Some of the sermons focus on the first part of the invocation, the fools say there is no God part, but my goal is to provide evidence of the lesson from Psalm 8 that John just read so well. When we look at God's heavens, the work of God's fingers, the moon, and the stars that God established, somehow humans matter and are cared for, and we even sometimes deserve the crown of God's glory and honor. A number of times in our tag class we discussed the Webb telescope photos we've been seeing for a few months that have so many of us in awe and wonder. Those photos bring into high relief a sense of creation too magnificent for me to think it reasonable to conclude random chance and chaos created the universe. The telescope is said to be able to look at starlight that's been traveling since nearly the beginning of the universe, over 13.5 billion years ago. We're seeing the starlight from way, way back, near to the beginning of its travels. And this is really rather remarkable stuff that mind-bogglingly allows us to time travel back to see that very ancient light. And since the time that starlight began, Stardust has also been on a journey, traveling the universe, expanding the universe, and becoming a part of absolutely every physical part of the universe. Gazillions of atoms of that stardust have clustered together to form galaxies and planets and a myriad of other celestial bodies in such complex formations. It's hard to imagine that no conscious, creative, and wise being or force has been involved in it. In my experience, things don't just fall together in complex matters by themselves without conscious, creative, and wise thought, action, and involvement. We tend to forget that bits of stardust not only make up celestial bodies, but also cluster together to make up every other animate and inanimate thing that humans have long encountered in creation, all of which are also very complex and extremely well put together and conceived. And so even without the modern benefit of a super telescope, it's not hard to understand why the psalmist wrote that only fools say to themselves, there is no God. And I get that it's easy to reject many of the human notions of God, especially the petty, angry, punishing humanoid like God often portrayed by religious leaders and theologians and even found in parts of the Bible. I'm an atheist to that God. But a great creator, force, or being appears not only very reasonable to believe in, but seems to me to be an inevitable logical conclusion, given the evidence of scientific laws and order and discovery, not to mention the complex nature of creation that we encounter all life long. And while we may not be able to come close to comprehending how or what that force or being truly is, common sense indicates creation is far too complicated and ordered to occur by happenstance. And because the idea of God has been so misused and corrupted by humankind, I would not call those who claim there is no God fools, but as I said, I understand why the psalmist would draw that conclusion. At the end of the day, this beingness we have, this beingness we are in and aware of, is just too grand to be mere clutters of stardust formed and forming by chance. And atheists, they call me a fool for saying that, but I'm more than okay with being that sort of fool for Christ. And I mentioned that we tend to forget that stardust makes up everything, but most of all, I think we forget that trillions of atoms of stardust form each human being. That stardust makes up and shares the ride through life that we really don't know how. But once our bodies are formed of stardust, a unique soul grows attached at some point and learns to animate our little portion of stardust. Since adulthood, adolescence even, we have possessed the power to decide where it goes and what it does, subject to environmental and physical restraints. The way I see it, we have been blessed with the great privilege of piloting a part of the cosmos here and now. How wondrous is that? And we can only imagine where our stardust began, where it's been, and where it will go. Biblically speaking, we can understand it to be the dust from which we have come and the dust to which we shall go. But in its present, clustered human form which comprises us, we can claim for now that stardust is us, and that we are in charge of it. We are the stuff of stars, and stars are the stuff of us, except for that one huge apparent difference. The measure of stardust that constitutes us has a soul in charge. And when we take our first breath, that already glorious dust miraculously lives, and even more miraculously, that dust soon grows to include consciousness, that it's alive and longs for knowledge and creativity and love. Well, we appear to uniquely be a life that knows it's alive and is intentionally creative and ordinarily has the ability to choose to be warm and loving. We're not. Again, throughout history, the vast majority of humans have concluded that whatever drew stardust together to form the existence of all things and us must also be conscious, creative, and wise, a being or a force that is also vastly greater than us. And we've called that greater consciousness and greater God. And we fancy that God is incarnate in us from our first to last breath, animating us and drawing us toward our own bestness as well as the bestness of others. This dust and breath stuff I've been going on about has biblical support. In the book of Genesis, we're told that God formed humans from dust and that God brought us to life with God's very own breath. We're also told that we are made in the image of God, which clearly does not mean we can create a universe or design life, but rather seems to suggest that, like God, we can create and imagine and draw ourselves and others toward bestness on an earthly level scale, if not a cosmic level scale. Last week was, of course, the anniversary of a very tragic event that started with ungodly human conduct that acted in the opposite direction from bestness. Ironically and horribly, men claiming to be religious and acting for God committed those terrible acts of terror that brought down 4 jets, 2 crashing into the Twin Towers in New York, 1 crashing into the Pentagon, and the other heroically thwarted from its target, crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. And there were nearly 3,000 deaths and over 25,000 injuries. Terrible evil deeds by men claiming to be religious shook the nation and the world to its very core. Stardust and 19 men and their cohort did not act in a divine incarnational manner. Rather, they incarnated evil in their acts, casting a long, dark shadow that looms even still. When 9/11 comes up, we tend to think about the darkness those men misguided their stardust to cause. And I would argue that how humanity came together in the immediate aftermath, though, is theologically far more important and far more telling. The amazing, gracious acts of millions of others guiding their stardust toward the care and desire and actions for the well-being of others far, far outshines the darkness and the shadows. And I suspect most of us might think of the heroic acts of the first responders, and rightly so, the heroism of the firefighters and police and ambulance crews cannot be questioned. To this day, their selfless acts are inspirational, laudable, and worthy of praise and honor. Those men and women, as well as the heroes on Flight 93, guided their Stardust into the fray to save as many as they could that day. It's beautiful, Christ-like stuff. When I think of 9/11, I seem to always end up thinking about one man, my dearest friend from law school, Brent. He was in New York City that day to attend a 9 a.m. meeting on the 109th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And as he was walking to the meeting, he stopped to aid a woman on the street who had fainted when she saw a plane fly into the North Tower. And at that moment, no one knew more was to follow, that the towers would collapse. And Brent continued to head for his 9 a.m. appointment. But his effort to help that stranger, fortunately, caused him to be late. And instead of being on the 109th floor, he was just getting into the South Tower elevators when he and a large crowd down in the lobby heard the second plane hit the twin tower that they were in. And there was mass hysteria. Unfortunately, Brent moved with the crowd out of the building. He describes it like being stuck in a herd of gazelle on the run, and went with the flow. And when he got outside, he started running with others away from the buildings. He didn't stop for 4 blocks. He remembers hearing people alongside talking about America being under attack, about the Pentagon being hit, and warnings to stay away from tall buildings. And knowing that the news was out and his family would be very worried, Brent ran into a law office he'd been to before to use their phone. No one was in the building. He grabbed the desk phone and called his wife to let him know that he was alive. And then he ran out of the office and turned to look toward the South Tower he had been in. And it crumbled before his eyes, transfixing him and everyone else watching until they saw the now famous dangerous cloud of dust and debris roiling and barreling toward him. Brent ran again, and he didn't stop until he got to Grand Central Station, 4 miles from the tower. When he got there, it was covered in dust and ash, and the station was locked. He started walking from hotel to hotel. There was no room at the inn. And Brent, a longtime Christian, it finally dawned on him to go to a faith community. And remarkably, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and other faith communities had already sprung into action only a half hour after the last tower had fallen. Faith communities rolled out carpets. They set up cots and mats and made way to shelter refugees and religious buildings. And they coordinated with members of their community to provide beds in their own home to as many strangers as they could. Brent lives in Utah, so he couldn't have been more of a stranger in New York, but you know what? The first church he wandered into gave him the name of a wonderful family that took him in, fed him, sheltered him. He tells a story about the maybe walking into a store to buy a toothbrush and comb, since all his belongings were left behind in the rush to survive. And he held the little kid's hand and meant so much to him. Brent was so touched by the love and the kindness of strangers, he names his New York City 9/11 story as one of honor and brotherhood and service that he'd never seen before. And he believes that care and kindness, that solidarity, those amazing acts of love are what kept him from experiencing continuing debilitating trauma from 9/11. In all its awfulness, September 11, 2001 ended up being a day that he was personally embraced with love and saved. And to this day, Brent is overwhelmed by that and so very grateful. And thank God that Brent's experience was not the only one. All across the city, ordinary Joes and Janes and their children tended to the well-being of strangers displaced by the 9/11 attacks. Faith communities and many others did what needed to be done to provide basics and kindness to the displaced. And we know now, too, that all across the world, people of all walks of life, far and wide, did what they could to help. Giving a place to sleep, to giving blood, to giving money, to giving support, to giving prayer. Humanity acted as the hands and the feet of God, and the voice of God as well. No one had to. They did it out of love, care, and the desire for the well-being of others. We are animated stardust that by and large wants and does love. Our Bibles inform us God is love. And the love shown to Brent and countless others by countless others on 9/11 is further proof that God exists. We're bits of stars with a blueprint to care and tend to the well-being of others. Virtually everyone on 9/11, after the towers were hit, proved that's true. See, there's not only proof that God exists, but proof that God is in us